Are you a retiree who's taking too much risk in their portfolio? Safety feels expensive, but risk is quietly creeping back. After years of market whiplash, inflation spikes, rate hikes, bond losses, and equity volatility, many retirees feel like they've survived the storm. And in 2026, a dangerous mindset is starting to take hold. The belief that the hard part is over. But here's the reality. Some of the riskiest retirement mistakes happen after volatile periods, not during them. When safety feels expensive and income feels harder to generate, retirees often take on risk without realizing it through portfolio drift, yield chasing, misunderstood bond exposure, and behavioral decisions driven by fatigue rather than strategy. In today's video, we'll break down whether retirees are taking too much risk in 2026, where that risk is hiding, and how to realign your portfolio so it supports income and longevity without gambling your retirement on the next market cycle. Before we dive in, my name is Ryan Knoll. I'm a certified financial planner and founder of NavWealth Partners, a financial planning firm that helps clients nationwide make smart money decisions. Let's jump into the video. So why is risk creeping back in 2026? Risk doesn't just show up as a bold decision. It typically shows up quietly. In 2026, many retirees are reacting to three pressures at once: higher living costs that haven't fully come back down since the pre-pandemic era, a desire for income after years of near zero yields, and fatigue from playing defense after volatile markets. When safe options feel insufficient, investors start reaching, not because they want to be aggressive, but because they feel like they have no choice. That's when unintended risk enters the picture. So let's break down where that risk is coming from and what you can do to fix it. The first risk is portfolio drift after volatile years. One of the most common and most often overlooked risks in retirement is portfolio drift. After years of market movement, many portfolios no longer resemble the allocation retirees originally intended. Stocks that recovered strongly may now dominate the portfolio. Bonds that struggled may have been neglected, and cash may have unintentionally grown. The danger is that often increases risk without a conscious decision. For example, a retiree who intended to hold a 60-40 portfolio may now be closer to 70 to 80% in stocks after equity gains over the last 3 years. Sector concentration may creep back in. You might have tech-heavy exposure, growth stocks, or U.S.-only equity risk at this point in time. Income-producing assets may quietly shift toward higher volatility instruments to make up lost yield. In retirement, risk isn't about what you own, it's about how your portfolio behaves during withdrawals. If your allocation drifts upward in risk, the next downturn can have a much larger impact than expected, especially if you're drawing income at the same time. The fix isn't market timing, it's intentional rebalancing, bringing the portfolio back in line with your risk tolerance and income needs, even when it feels uncomfortable to sell those winners. For retirement clients, I typically rebalance semi-annually. I want to make sure these clients don't overexpose themselves to a portfolio that has grown too aggressive or too conservative because of market conditions. This makes sure that they're always targeting the right expected return for their situation and helps mitigate being caught in an overly aggressive portfolio during a market downturn. The next risk that we see is yield chasing disguised as income investing. When retirees say they want income, they usually mean stability. But in practice, income-seeking behavior often leads to yield chasing, which can be one of the most dangerous forms of risk. In 2026, we're seeing retirees pile into the same types of investments: high-yield bond funds, leveraged income products, REITs without understanding how rates impact those types of investments, option income strategies that they don't fully understand or comprehend, dividend stocks with deteriorating fundamentals, and expensive buffered ETFs that cap their gains on the upside. The problem isn't income itself, it's confusing yield with safety. A 7% yield doesn't help you if the underlying investment drops by 20% in a downturn. In retirement, total return and volatility matter far more than headline yield. Yield chasing often introduces credit risk, liquidity risk, equity-like drawdowns disguised as an income vehicle, and correlation risk, where assets that fall together when markets turn. A sustainable retirement income strategy prioritizes reliability, diversification, and drawdown control, not the highest yield available. The third risk is misunderstanding bond risk in a higher rate world. After one of the worst bond markets in decades, many retirees assume bonds are now safe again. But bond risk hasn't just disappeared, it's just changed. In 2026, Bond risk shows up in three main ways. First, there's duration risk. Longer term bonds are still sensitive to interest rate changes. Even small increases can cause meaningful price declines, especially for retirees relying on bond funds rather than individual bonds held to maturity. There's also credit risk, which to boost yields, many retirees are taking on lower quality bonds. In a slowing economy, credit spreads widen quickly, causing losses just when retirees expect to have stability. There's also fund structure risk. Bond funds don't mature. If rates rise or credit conditions worsen, fund prices can stay depressed for long periods of time. Retirees withdrawing from bond funds during downturns may lock in losses they never recover from. The solution isn't abandoning bonds altogether, it's using the right bond structure. Shorter duration for near-term income, high-quality bonds for stability, bond ladders or treasuries where appropriate, and clear alignment between bond purpose and spending timeline. Ideally, you want to match your timeline with the bond's duration, and you want to make sure that you're picking high credit quality bonds so not to introduce more risk than necessary into your fixed income portfolio. One of the most subtle risks in 2026 is behavioral overconfidence. Retirees who live through recent volatility without major damage may conclude, hey, I handled that just fine. I can take on more risk than I thought. But this overconfidence is often based on circumstances that likely won't repeat. You may not have been withdrawing heavily or at all from your portfolio yet. Markets may have recovered faster than expected. You may not have faced simultaneous healthcare or personal expense issues. And inflation may have masked real spending erosion. Surviving volatility during accumulation is not the same as surviving it during distribution. Once withdrawals begin, losses compound faster and recoveries matter less. The risk isn't that retirees want to gamble, it's that they underestimate how fragile a portfolio becomes once income is required from it. Before we jump into the last three risks, I wanted to kick off 2026 by thanking the viewers for their support over the last year. We've grown this channel to nearly 1,700 subscribers from zero in 2025, and we could not have done that without all of you. So thank you so much for your support. And if you're new here, join 1,700 smart investors who get our content weekly on their YouTube channel by subscribing below. This will make sure that 2026 is your best financial year yet. Now, moving on to the fifth risk, ignoring sequence of returns risk. Sequence of returns risk doesn't show up in average return projections, but it dominates real-life retirement outcomes. If poor market returns occur early in retirement while withdrawals are ongoing, portfolios can suffer permanent damage even if long-term returns are normal. In 2026, retirees taking on more risk may be unknowingly increasing their exposure to this exact problem. Typical warning signs are increasing equity exposure late in life to catch up, relying on market returns to fund basic living expenses, no cash or short-term reserve for spending, and no flexibility in withdrawal amounts during market downturns. Managing sequence risk requires structure, not prediction. Things like cash or short-term reserves for several years of spending, dynamic withdrawal strategies instead of fixed inflation increases, rebalancing rules that add discipline during volatility, and guaranteed income sources to reduce portfolio dependence. Another quiet risk in 2026 is failing to separate your growth assets from your spending assets. When all assets sit in one portfolio with no segmentation, retirees are more likely to sell growth assets at the wrong time, panic during downturns, overreact to short-term market moves, and undermine long-term growth by being forced to withdraw at inopportune times. This is why many successful retirement plans use some form of a bucket strategy, a short-term bucket for current spending needs, an intermediate bucket for the next several years, and a long-term growth bucket for inflation protection and longevity. Buckets don't reduce risk mathematically, but they dramatically reduce behavioral mistakes, which is often the most important part of having a successful retirement. The final risk is letting headlines drive decisions. After years of nonstop financial news, many retirees are simply exhausted, but disengagement can be just as risky as overreaction. In 2026, retirees face conflicting narratives about inflation, rates, and markets, pressure to do something after volatility, fear of missing out on rebounds, and fear of losing ground after years of saving. Headline-driven decisions often result in buying risk after it's already repriced and abandoning safety after it's already done its job. A sound retirement plan doesn't react to headlines. It responds to predefined rules tied to your income needs, your time horizon, and long-term objectives. So you're a retiree. How should you think about risk in 2026? Well, the goal isn't to eliminate it altogether. That's impossible and often counterproductive. The goal is to take the right kind of risk and the right amount for the right reason. In 2026, that means risk aligned with longevity, not short-term returns, risk that supports income sustainability, not yield maximization, risk that's intentional, monitored, and periodically reset, and risk that allows flexibility during downturns. For most retirees, what that translates to is a diversified portfolio with clear purpose for each asset, adequate cash and high-quality fixed income for spending, enough equity exposure to fight inflation for 30-plus years, guaranteed income sources to reduce portfolio stress, and regular rebalancing to prevent silent drift. Let's go over a practical checklist for retirees this year. If you're retired or close to it, ask yourself these questions. Has my portfolio drifted from its original allocation? Am I taking more risk to generate income than I realize? Do I understand the risks inside of my bond and income holdings? Do I have a plan for withdrawals during market downturns? And do I have income sources that don't depend on what the markets do? If you can't confidently answer those questions, risk may already be creeping in. So what's the bottom line here? In 2026, the danger for retirees isn't obvious recklessness. It's quiet risk-taking driven by frustration, fatigue, and the desire for income. Safety may feel expensive, but uncontrolled risk is far more costly, especially once withdrawals begin. The retirees who thrive over the next decade won't be the ones chasing yield or reacting to headlines. They'll be the ones with disciplined portfolios, clear income plans, and risk-aligned longevity, not emotion. If you want help evaluating whether your retirement portfolio is taking the right amount of risk and aligning it with income, taxes, and long-term security, that's exactly what my team does here at NAV Wealth Partners. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, make smart money decisions.